wave of popular protests in Egypt and Tunisia has reached the streets of Tehran, where Iranian police used tear gas to disperse anti-government protesters. There are reports of at least one death. The Iranian authorities have stepped up security, blocking access to internet sites and jamming satellite news channels. Our Iran correspondent James Reynolds has been following developments here in London.
Listen to what they're chanting tonight in Tehran. Mubarak Ben Ali, now it's time for Sayyid Ali. That's the name of Iran's supreme leader. It's a rare, even astonishing attack on the country's untouchable ruler. One man films this footage from a balcony. Riot police take back a street from the protesters. Here, another man is taken away by the police. He's hit over the head as he walks away. Earlier, a crowd of demonstrators went after a man they accused of being a government spy. They're trying to follow what they've just seen in Tunisia and in Egypt.
We can see hundreds of anti-riot police and security forces, and then they started to disperse the people by force, but people started to chanting slogans against the police. I could see a lot of clashes, severe clashes. Police started to launch tear gases.
This protester had no fear of government or even of heights. He waved his banners from the top of a crane. Iran's demonstrators believe that it's simple. Their own 2009 mass anti-government protests helped to inspire the protesters this year in Egypt and Tunisia. Now they say that the Arab world protests have re-inspired them to try and have another go at facing down their own government in Iran. So demonstrators are on the streets of another Middle Eastern country. This time, the United States knows what it wants to say.
They deserve to have the same rights that they saw being played out in Egypt and that are part of their own birthright.
But Iran's government calls these demonstrators seditionists. It defeated them in 2009, and it will expect to do so again in 2011.
The difference between Iran and Egypt is the Iranian security forces have been told to crack down very hard on the opposition. I'm sure they will do that. But then again, that doesn't necessarily mean the opposition movement is going to go away.
We don't yet know if one day of protest by a few hundred people will make any difference. But Iran's opposition has made one important point. It is still alive. James Reynolds, BBC News.
Well, joining me now from Washington is our correspondent, Steve Kingston. Steve, we heard in James's report there a bit of what Hillary Clinton had to say, but how are the White House reading this situation now?
Well, they're intrigued by this and they are trying to nudge things in favour of the protesters. In fact, as soon as Hosni Mubarak resigned at the end of last week in Egypt, the White House very quickly got on the front foot with regard to Iran. If you recall, Iran's government took the side of the protesters in Egypt, claimed that what was happening in Egypt was an Islamic revolution along the lines of what happened in Tehran 32 years ago. But the Americans are now hitting back and saying, OK, if you really did support the Egyptian protesters, why are you now not allowing your own people the same right of protest? Hillary Clinton calling that hypocrisy. We've had the president's national security advisor making comments about it as well. We've had the president's spokesman saying that Iran is scared of the will of its people. There is a sense in Washington that one doesn't quite know what is possible in these tumultuous times, and the Americans have seized upon an opportunity to attack the government in Tehran.
They've seized on it, Steve, in a much quicker way than they did in their initial responses to what was happening in Egypt in the preliminary days. What can we read into that response?
Well, I think you can read into that there's a big difference between Egypt and Iran as far as Washington is concerned. Egypt is a crucial ally in the region, vital to the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians, and the Americans were treading very, very carefully in terms of where they went in their public statements. On the other hand, the United States has had no relationship to speak of with Iran for 3 decades. It is locked in this tussle over Tehran's alleged nuclear ambitions, deadlocked at the IAEA. So the Americans, as I say, have seen an opportunity and thought we have nothing whatsoever to lose by talking about this publicly.
Just turning the attentions to Egypt for a moment, given their response to that, many were critical about the back and forth nature of the Obama administration in terms of their rhetoric. Have they learned lessons from that? Will they endeavour to give themselves a more clear-cut message to the outside world?
Well, I think Iran is a pretty unique scenario, but I think as far as officials here are concerned, it is important that they consider the wider region, because there is one risk for Washington in this, and that is that if they are seen to be publicly encouraging demonstrators in Tehran, some people might ask, well, why aren't you encouraging demonstrations in Saudi Arabia or in Bahrain or in Yemen, where there have been people on the streets? Washington's response seems to depend on its relationship with the government in the country in question. So itself, Washington, could be accused by some of hypocrisy in this case.
Okay, Steve. Thank you very much for that. Steve Kingston there for us in Washington. Well, in Egypt, thousands of